Like it or not, Brexit is happening. Brexit is usually discussed as something happening between United Kingdom and the EU. The EU, of course, is not a homogeneous entity. Different European countries have different histories and different sets of cultural and economic relations with Britain. So even as they negotiate with UK as one, individually they view the British and Brexit in different ways. Geographically, the Netherlands is as close as a European country can be to Britain. Culturally too, it has great affinity to Britain.
Most of the upper middle class in the Netherlands that I'm part of is Anglophile. It's almost a way to signal your status. So the nouveau riche and the working class and so lower middle class, they're all enthralled to American culture. But if you want to show that you're highly educated, then you like British culture, and there's so much to choose from.
After Ireland, no country in the Eurozone has closer economic ties to the UK than Netherlands. Both countries champion free trade and strive for close relations with United States. The Netherlands followed Britain into its wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. In European politics, the British and the Dutch have been close allies.
There are 3 countries in Europe that have their pension sector sort of in place. That's the Swiss, the Brits and the Dutch. So that means that we sit on this vast pile of money and we have very little power in the EU to defend it. And there are all sorts of ways that you can sort of nibble at all that pension money with rules and so on. Now the Brits used to support us, we used to support the Brits, and once you had the Brits on board, you needed a few more countries and you had a blocking minority. That's now gone. So in political terms, we have lost our big brother, and this is why this initiative called Mark Rutte and the Seven Dwarfs, where he tries to build a coalition with lots of small countries. That's why the Dutch are investing in embassies across the EU, because Dutch foreign policy has to be rebooted almost from scratch.
The Netherlands has huge investments in UK. Royal Dutch Shell, Unilever and Elsevier are some examples of huge Anglo-Dutch corporations. About 200,000 Dutch jobs depend on trade with UK. So when the British voted to leave the EU in 2016, the Dutch were a bit torn. Despite being an EU member, they had strong incentives to push for a sweet-deal-Brexit for Britain that would minimize disruption in the British economy, so inextricably linked to their own. However, by 2018, the Dutch were pretty certain that the benefits of staying in a huge economic union far outweighed the costs of Brexit, and a sweet exit deal for Britain would be a threat to the long-term stability of that union. In January 2018, while admitting that Brexit would have negative consequences for Dutch businesses, the Dutch Secretary for Economic Affairs said that it was up to the businesses to prepare for them.
I think what happened is that there was a growing realization what a sweet deal for Britain would mean. Because a sweet deal for Britain would mean that we create this exception. And even though no country wants to leave the EU because the benefits are bigger than the costs, every country wants its own exceptions. And you cannot run an organization with 28 exceptions. The German car industry thinks the same. The Brexiteers all through the campaign would promise, look, if we vote for leave, the German car industry will make sure that we get a sweet deal because the Germans sell so many cars here. And the day after the referendum, already before the referendum, the Germans said, look, the damage that we incur if we unravel the EU as a workable entity is far worse than not selling new cars. Also because you won't be able to afford our cars because of your recession on account of Brexit. And Germans are too polite to say this, but that's what they mean.
It is not very certain how exactly Brexit will affect business climate in Britain. So a lot of businesses are planning to either move to Europe or to start new operations in Europe. EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young, has a financial intelligence unit called the Brexit Tracker. As of January 2019, 80 of the 222 financial services companies it tracked were either considering moving to Europe or had already made plans to do so. It estimates that financial services companies have already relocated $1 trillion worth of assets to the EU in preparation for Brexit. This flight of companies is not just happening within the financial sector. The list of big and small manufacturers leaving Britain is also growing. Located close to Britain and having a large English-speaking population, the Netherlands is well suited to attract a lot of these businesses. It is already courting 250 such companies.
This is the best place in continental Europe to invest if you need an EU headquarters, because the population knows English, the cost of doing business is quite low, the judicial system is very good, the airport is fantastic.
There are many reasons why Brexit happened. The building blocks can be found in Britain's colonial past and its experience of the Second World War. However, the trigger for Brexit was clearly a Europe-wide political movement that led to the 2016 referendum. Over the past decade or so, populist leaders and political parties mushroomed across the continent and across Britain. They have found much traction among large parts of the population that feel left out of their increasingly globalizing societies and economies. Key to the ideology of the populists is seceding from the EU, which they believe dilutes their national identities and sovereignty. The British populists were able to push their agenda to the heart of British politics and win the Brexit vote. The Netherlands too has its share of populist leaders. Many of them are openly anti-EU. So how far is the Netherlands from an exit?
I think we're very, very far, except when a binding referendum were held. But for that to happen, you need political majorities that will simply not come about. So I think barring a major traumatic event, and I'm certainly not excluding that possibility around the Eurozone, around refugees, around terrorism, I think right now the chance of an exit are very, very small. We have a different political system. The Brits have a district system, first past the post, which means that in a lot of places in Britain, there hasn't been any meaningful political activity for the past 50 years because it was always a safe seat. So then you have a referendum and suddenly there's nothing in place. Then untested people, a one-off coalition around the Leave campaign trots out all these lies and false promises, and there simply isn't the intellectual and media infrastructure to deal with it. That's very different in a system of proportional representation where every vote counts equally. So there is a political system and for campaigning across the country. And then we have all these different parties. UKIP, the virulently anti-EU party, got 4 million votes in the general election when I was living in Britain, and that got them one seat in a 650 seat strong parliament. Now here, if you have 4 million votes out of 40 million, 10%, you get 10% of the seats. So we have had people like Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson in Parliament for the past 50 years. We're used to these people. And even though they're getting more support than they used to, it's hovering around 20-25%, which I think is only an invitation to start dealing with the legitimate grievances they air, because part of their program is entirely legitimate. It's about the rights of ordinary people and the poor, and the sort of mainstream parties have pretty much deserted and abandoned the vulnerable, and the vulnerable now vote for what is called the populists. We should do more to help the vulnerable, and they'll come back to us.
As of February 2019, just a few weeks before the Big Ben strikes Brexit, Britain looks as divided as ever over its relationship with the European Union. After 2 years of negotiations, the British government and the EU put together the terms of Brexit, which Prime Minister Theresa May is struggling to pass through her parliament. Meanwhile, on the other side of the negotiating table, 27 European nations have managed to stay united, dismissing any suggestions that Britain could walk out of the Union with a sweet deal outside of the rulebook. Perhaps like the Netherlands, the others too are fairly sure that the benefits of a stable European Union far outweigh the costs of letting an important member go without bending any exit rules. Perhaps one day, Britain will realize this too.